Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to today's session on how to build and maintain a startup culture as you scale your company. Today's session will be presented by Bachar, which is he's the managing director for Microsoft for Startup in Israel, and this event is presented for the Reactor community. As you may know, the Reactor are currently closed as due to COVID, but we focus more on online events such as today's session. This session is actually part of a series of 3 events presented by Microsoft for Startups in Israel, and this is the first one. I'm going to share a link with you and the chat box soon where you can view the recording. So just so you know, the event will be recorded, and if you want to listen to it later, it will be available on the Reactor's YouTube channel, and I will share the link in the chat box. You're also welcome to ask any questions that you have about the session, and Raz will take the time to answer those at the end. I think the last thing that I wanted to tell you is that I'm also going to share a link to a survey, and we will appreciate if you can take a minute or two to complete the survey and give us your feedback. That will help us a lot. I will share that in the chat box as well. I think that's it, excuse me, from my end. I'm going to pass it on to Raz now to kick off the session. So Raz, over to you.
Thank you, Moria. Hello, everyone. My name is Bachar, and I'm the Managing Director for Microsoft for Startups in Israel. Today's session is going to be focused more on like how to build your startup culture. Again, kind of understanding a little bit of what is the company culture, what's the motivation to have and to define it. And the target audience is usually early stage entrepreneurs, but not only. Like I can definitely encourage you to also take a lot of best practices that we will learn today, and you can even implement it into small teams. So a little bit about myself. I've been basically in the technology world for a long time. I've been with Microsoft for roughly 18 months, leading the activity in Israel. Before that, I spent around 7 years building AWS operation and scaling it to the startup segment across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So speaking about startup culture, one of the key aspects to understand is what's the motivation for that. And there is a lot of information of how to build a startup and how to create the customer discovery process and customer validation. And Stephen Blank, basically like the godfather of let's say the recent age entrepreneurship, define the startup journey in 4 phases, and there's a lot of focus on those 2 initial phases that we see in the beginning. There's very little that is known and being shared and discussed around like the last part of like the company building. So again, there's a great focus on the early stage and like how to get started and how to do the validation, but there's very little known about what's happening after you already got to product market fit and after you manage to gain a couple of customers. Look at the entrepreneurs that you can see in this slide. I encourage you to take a moment to think what is kind of shared between all of them. If you know the companies, if you know the stories of the founders and the startups themselves, you would quickly understand that one thing that is shared to all of them is that all of those people that you see in the slide are not only the CEOs of the companies, but they're also the founders, which is surprisingly enough not that trivial. As a company grow, there is a tendency to actually replace the CEO, and you can see some of the statistics that were published by Harvard Business Review. Only 25% of the CEO founders that started the company actually end up to be the same CEO that take that company publicly. And eventually, again, like this is something that it's a great book that I encourage everybody to grab and to read by Ben Horowitz from Anderson Horowitz. And one of the things that they kind of focus is that there are two types of CEOs, and it's very different to be a CEO that build a company rather to be one that managing and scaling a company. And we'll see down the road of this presentation of how company culture is actually like a key component of those successful entrepreneurs that were able to evolve as a CEO from being just the founder to leading a large-scale organization. And when we look at the definition of what is a company culture, so it's a blend of values, belief, taboos, symbols, and rituals, and also myths that a company can develop over time. And as you can probably imagine, a lot of the things are, kind of above the surface, right? The thing that we can see, the things that we can talk about, the things that we say publicly. But then a lot of the company culture is something that usually we don't really see on the surface, right? So a lot of them is on the way that we think, on the way that we behave, on the way that we take decisions, and it's not that trivial to embed a culture which is so observed in the employee day-to-day life. So why is it important? First of all, the culture will help you to understand, who is it that you hire, right? They should share the same culture. How you reward, how you compensate good employees, or how do you what kind of measures you take against employees that are underperforming. Which feature in a product or roadmap you should prioritize, right? So this is another thing that the culture can take into account. Many times there are conflicts, whether it be between founders or different groups or different leaders in the organizations. How you ensure that you're moving forward on the right path, right? That you're staying focused into the mission that you defined in the beginning. And then lastly, what purpose is the company serving, right? So the culture is usually something that keeps us very honest and on path to make sure that we are aligned to the initial purpose that we set out to do when we established that business. So who should share that culture, right? So we have obviously the founders, right? So we want to be sure that that initial team that is setting up the business is aligned on the company culture, right? That they share the same values, that they agree on that. Second, we want to make sure that employees, for sure, the one that we are going to hire as kind of the first employees, because each employee that you will hire in the beginning, they will end up hire like a bunch of many other employees after them. So we want to make sure there's a high threshold or a high bar of people that understand the culture. You want your investors to understand that culture, right? Like you want somebody that will be with you shoulder to shoulder and not just question a lot of things of the decision-making process. And then lastly, and it's something that is not that trivial, you want your customers to also share that culture. Why is that? Because there's many evidence that companies tend to be more loyal and more satisfied when they share the same culture and value of the company or the product that they are buying, right? So a couple of examples that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into. So a great company with an amazing culture is Zappos.com. It's an online retailer mainly focusing on shoes, and they're actually considered to be like one of the most interesting companies in the world when it comes to company culture. Okay, they don't refer to themselves as a group or a company or a startup. They refer to themselves as a family. Okay, which is also something that relates a little bit in the beginning of what we mentioned on what is a company culture, right? It's also that jargon and that set of definition that you define internally. You can see the 10 core values that Zappos kind of believe, and a lot of them are kind of customer-centric, right? Eventually, it's an online retailer for for shoes specifically, and you can see some of the things that they had in mind. Now, how is it that they chose to implement those core values in the day-to-day activity that they have? So one incredible example for that would be that employees that they hire, so especially kind of the new hires that they have, they will take them through all of the new hire training. They will do all of the certifications and required courses of what does it mean to be a customer-centric representative. They will give them the needed qualifications, and they will the set of skills to operate some of the systems. But then, in the end of those couple of weeks of training, they will actually offer that employee $2,000 to quit, okay? Which is kind of odd. But then when you think about it, it will get you to a point in which if an employee that is like they share that company value and they are driven from within, so those $2,000, it wouldn't be that much of an incentive for them, right? So they will be way more incentivized to stay with the company because they share the culture, right? So this is another filtering mechanism that Zappos is implementing. And then another one, just kind of to flatten the organization and to almost kind of avoid hierarchy, they don't have that kind of a prestige corner office, right? So everybody are kind of in an open space. And then another interesting thing is they want to make the company as accessible as possible, whether it be for employee feedback on management or for customers on the service that they are getting. So one of the another thing that they implement is that the most junior customer representative has the same authority and mandate as a CEO when it comes to helping customers. Okay, so whether it be refunds or returns or anything like that, they don't have that kind of process of hey, listen, I need to get my manager to approve that or anything like that. The most junior representative has the same authority as the CEO. And then similar to that, they have like a around the clock 365 days per year return policy, okay, which also goes into one of the core beliefs of the customer obsession, right? So there's no day in the year that we're kind of taking like laying back and offering some sort of a low tier of service, right? So they always ready to serve their customers. And again, like the free overnight shipping also relates to how much they're going to do the above and beyond for the customers to invest in that like to increase the customer satisfaction. And then lastly, one of the principles they have is like to be peculiar, right? Like to be kind of odd and original and eccentric, and to take that to another level, they actually chose to be based in headquarters in Las Vegas, which isn't that kind of trivial for a high-tech company. Okay, so that's kind of one example. And there are many studies, and I will share with you the link afterwards, around how they develop that culture. And you can see back in 2005, Zappos CEO Tony Hsieh, he actually shared, he sent an email to all of the employees, actually letting them know that they are now they got to a point that they want to build their company culture, and they actually have like a formal document that will define what is it that Zappos stand for and what is it they're looking to do. And in order to do that, they mapped out kind of 3 pillars. So define what we value. So each employee needs to kind of note what are the things that drive them and what are the things that they value. Another thing is like how we operate, right? Like who are we? And then what is our personalities? Like who are we as human beings? And you can see some of the examples that they got as a response. So on what we value, that would be like to do like a wow effect, like to have trust, the long-term thinking. On how we operate, that will be like emotional connection, working as a team, empowerment, ownership around the world. And then what is our personality? So to be a little bit of weird, to have fun, to have passion. So those kind of things that they kind of collected. And then it took them a lot of iteration, but then in the end, in 2006, they actually managed to narrow that list, and they sent to that let's say that core principles that they filtered to the entire company, and you can see that list on the top left corner. And they told them, hey, these are kind of the things that we got from you. Please now develop that to like to a one-liner, okay? So in the next iteration, they actually got from the employees like specific text around each one of them. And the cool thing is that they later on took that text and embedded in their mission statement and their core value. And you can see some of the things that that they got over here, right? So it's a commit to running from the core value as a core value-based company. Figure out kind of what is the personal value. Combine the discover value of, like each employee actually brought something very personal into that process. They looked at one another and checked, are those values that we define as a group actually hold like who we are today, right? So if we look left and right and we see our colleagues, are those people that meet that standard, that meet that commitment? So this is kind of the discovery process that they went through, and they ended up with that incredible list. And in the end, like a couple of things to take from that is, first of all, it was driven very early in the company life cycle, right? So, and again, like there are many cases where Tony, the CEO of Zappos, actually calling out how that set of core values guided them as they build their products, they develop their culture, the way that they hire, the way that they eventually even got acquired in the end. So this is like one thing. Another one is how it helped to have the all of the company aligned and collectively commit to that set of principle. And in the end, it's about the people and their own belief, right? So each employee actually felt like they have something personal now in the company, which is basically like an amazing point to be when you're leading a company. You want your employees to be like to have the highest level of buy-in to what the company is looking to do. And if you go to that website, zapposinsight.com, you'll actually find a lot of material and templates around how Zappos managed to do that. The next example that we're going to talk about is Airbnb, which is again very well-known service that I assume most of you are familiar with. One of the interesting conversation that Brian Chesky had with the founder of Airbnb and Peter Thiel, one of the early investors of Airbnb, had back in 2012. Brian actually went to Peter Thiel, and this kind of in a very casual conversation, he actually asked him, hey, listen, like, what is kind of your number one advice for me as we scale the company? And you can see actually in a blog post that Brian replied describing that meeting. He basically said, don't the culture. And Brian actually thought about that sentence, like, why would a top investor with everything, all of the potential, all of the business insight, all of the relationship and strategy will end up kind of calling the culture as kind of the one thing that is the most important? And he dove really deep into that, and that got him to a point that he understood the importance of that. And he also went into this kind of mission to develop and again to formalize what the Airbnb culture is actually going to stand for. And from that process, he actually got into the Airbnb core principles. Now, the stronger the culture, the less corporate process the company needs, right? So this is like a key attribute that he understands, is that as they scale the company, if everybody are going to align to the same mission, it's going to reduce the amount of friction, reduce the process for decision making. People can be as independent and as autonomous as possible because they have this kind of set of rules that will define them. And just to take that to the extreme, Brian Chesky was actually physically present in all of the hiring interviews of the first 300 employees. Okay, so think about, again, whatever the stage that your company is at the moment. Think about like the founder and CEO of the company actually checking in every single new employee, doing the interview process of the first 300 employees, just to make sure that they are aligned to the company core mission and values. And you can see some of the things that Brian actually ended up with. So first of all, be a host, right? So serve others as and make them feel belong. And it's not only like, it will sound very like, to the people that know the Airbnb business, it will sound very much relates to what's the business of Airbnb, but then the way that they can describe it here is that they expect each and every employee of Airbnb to make sure that their internal stakeholders are also getting the best level of service as possible, right? So champion the mission, like understanding, what is kind of the goal and what is kind of the mission that Airbnb is looking to develop, right? So it's those kind of things that Brian and Airbnb kind of defined, which is very much related to the business of Airbnb, but then also of how is it that they're running their company. We talked about before that one of the key pillars in that, like, the set of stakeholders that should share the culture. We talked about like your employees and the entire company. So how is it that you take those set of beliefs and the core values and you roll it into different departments, right? So if you're in the let's say customer facing role, so that might be a little bit easier, right? Like, what does it mean to be a host and to build a community, right? But when you're an engineer, like, how is that actually translate? And what the engineering team in Airbnb did is that they took those set of core values and then translate into their day-to-day work. And in the end, they end up kind of building a community of developers and being one of the biggest contributors for open source, making their libraries as accessible as possible to that community. So with that process, they actually put themselves as a host and delivering that kind of service. Now, next up, which is something that, again, I can consider to be one of the most challenging things that there are, is like, how is it that you roll your culture outside your customers? And one of the things that Airbnb management actually saw, once they got to a certain scale, they saw that many hosts are actually just using it to make a buck. So they invest less on the experience that their guests are going to have, and focus more on just, hey, here's a room, give me your money, and that's it, okay? And they wanted to take that core value of being a host to the next level, okay, and to actually ensuring that hosts are motivated to behave that way. So what they actually did is that they created a new, let's say, a recognition tier, which is called a Superhost. And that Superhost, when you go to the website, you see the criteria that you need to meet in order to qualify for a title of a Superhost. You will see that many of the attributes that you have over there are aligned to the mission that Airbnb has. And it's only when your guests are ranking you against the Airbnb core values, again, to a certain level, it's only then where you're getting to that level of Superhost, which obviously, again, gets you higher in the search rank and get you like the best guests that there are, okay? So that's actually managed to scale the culture outside the company into their customers. And then we talked about how the core values and those principles can be a competence, even like not only when you're building a company and you scale it and so on, but then also when you need to make a really a hard decision. And you can see this is actually from just a few months ago, from May to 2020. And this is also something that Airbnb and Brian shared on their company blog post. The title of the blog post was, today I have to share some very bad news, some very sad news. And you can see in red the announcement that they are reducing the size of Airbnb workforce, okay? And this is because of COVID. And you can see I copy paste part of the text, and you can see some of the thing that was extremely important is like, how is it that they can take care of the employees that they now need to let go because of the circumstances, how they can give them like the best treatment as possible. And you can see in bold, like we were guided by our core values on how we approach that reduction process. And you can see on the right some of the things that they in the end up kind of giving to those employees that they had to let go. And the core takeaway from here is that even in those kind of really hard circumstances, they turn to the core values to guide them on how is it that they should behave, instead of trying to figure out things as they go along. And now another example that I found, which honestly like I really like. I don't know much about rugby, but I do know a thing or two about like kind of building company culture. And the All Blacks is actually considered to be, so the All Blacks is a New Zealand national rugby team, and they are considered to be like the most successful professional sports franchise in history. In the last 100 years that the club is basically exists, they have like the highest rate of wins as a team. And it kind of get you wonder of what makes such franchise and such a group of team being so successful, operating in like the highest level of threshold possible for such a long time. And not surprising, that's go back to the culture that they define. And when we look at kind of what are kind of the leadership principles that the All Black has, it mapped roughly to 15 kind of key takeaways. And there are a few things that I saw that were interesting enough, right? So it doesn't matter like how big champions and the amount of recognition that they have, they don't think of themselves as too big to do the small things. And one of the stories that they have is that even after like the largest and most important championship match, they will still be the ones that will clean their own locker rooms and their own like sweep the sheds and so on. Okay, because from their perception, like they own everything like from beginning to end. They have this kind of responsibility concept in which leaders create leaders. So it's not only that I need to develop myself as a player. I also want to be like I'm being measured, and my coach and my team actually expect me to develop others. Okay, so by default that makes everybody leaders, and it puts them in that kind of state of mind. And then the other one is like embrace expectations. And when you think about like how much pressure it is for a new team member joining the All Blacks, to operate and understand, kind of meeting those expectations, because nothing short than winning the championship will consider to be something which is a bad outcome, right? So there's huge amount of pressure in every single game, because again, it's not only the the way that you play, it's that you also take into account all of that legacy that you develop over time. And the thing that kind of glue everything together is that operating under those core mission statement, that set of values, that create an ethos, okay, which is kind of the belief in an ideal, in something that almost kind of something larger than just the group itself. It's just that it's the idea of what it represents. And this is something that basically creates the biggest motivation, whether it be for the players, for the franchise, and then also for the fans themselves. Now, looking into a little bit about the difference of, what's the difference between a mission statement and a vision. That's also something important to understand. So a mission statement is something that kind of will define the purpose. It will be something a little bit more practical. To some extent, will be short-term thinking. It will help you to answer very specific questions of, where's the added value? What is the unmet need? What is it that we're looking to improve? So those kind of very practical things will help you to define that mission statement. Now, a vision will be something a little bit more amorphic, will be more long-term thinking, and it will be way more emotional in when we define it. So what is it that we're looking to achieve? How is it that we're looking to change the life of our customers or of the world, or what motivates us? What are the key attributes that we're looking to put front and center, kind of when we give that, when we build our products, when we talk about our company. And one of the key things over here, it's there's a great TED talk on how great leaders inspire specific action by Simon Singh, which kind of talk about start with why, okay? And again, I definitely encourage you to check out that talk. But when you talk about how you do things, then you think about what drive your big idea, what needs are you trying to address, and then how do you want to positively impact the people's life? Okay, so these kind of things will eventually help you to define your purpose and the benefit that you can bring to the world. Okay, so it's very much encouraged to kind of start with why. And then as you go along and you're trying to define and document the values that you have, you need to think about kind of what behaviors you're looking to drive as kind of the company value, and again, would it be being driven from something very idealistic, or again giving some value to your customer, or making the buck, right? So this is something that will very much influence on how is it you're going to do the business, and how is it you're going to build a company, and who you hire. Think about when is it appropriate to put the needs of the team about those of a customer, right? So this is kind of something very interesting to think about, right? So after you get and you define your values, these are kind of the example questions that you can test yourself on. Is the core values that you define help you to come to answer those questions? We talked about, again, kind of the Airbnb example, but eventually the people that you're going to hire must share your culture and your set of beliefs. Otherwise, that is probably the best recipe for for conflict and for arguments and for politics and so on. I know that there are many companies, big and small, that actually have that kind of culture fit interview as part of their hiring process, and it's definitely something that I can encourage you to do to make sure that people that you hire are kind of aligned to that set of principles that you define. And again, it might sound trivial, but it takes a lot of effort, but it's definitely helped to define like a positive culture, which makes the working place, fun and make it, friendly and safe, of course, and so on. Also, like one shared criteria between many of the leadership principles or core values or mission statement that I've seen is like open communication. So it doesn't matter like if it's like a feedback giving mechanism on your management, on products, on for the employees, for the customers. Open communication is something that is almost shared across all of the companies that I had the chance to review that are very much driven from their core values. And then it's an evolving process, right? So you also need to make sure that you constantly review your culture, and you also measure yourself and your teammates against those core values. And then last but not least, lead by example. I definitely think that in the end, I've seen many companies that have those kind of core values, but in the end of the day, it's just printed on your employee card or hang on the wall. Nobody operates according to those leadership principles. And a key way to ensure that culture is being propagated across all the different parts of the organization is, lead by example. Ensure that you're using the same language in your day-to-day work that like call out the fact that you are taking decisions based on core value number 1, number 5, right? Like make it part of the day-to-day work and life for the employees to actually be aligned to that, okay? Because again, everything kind of starts with the leader from that perspective and will propagate to the rest of the organization. And with that, I'd like to thank you for the time. I'm Raz Bachar at Microsoft.com. If anybody has any questions, thank you so much.
Thank you, Raz. This presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to share it in the Q&A chat box. I think we have one question now. Yes, so someone asked, how do you test for culture fit in a new employee? I posted the question in the chat, so you can view it there.
Excellent. Sorry, I was on mute for a second. I was saying that this is a great question, and again, obviously, it very much relates to what are the specific values that you're looking to evaluate. But I can tell you that if you take into example things like attention to details, empowering others, or customer-centric, for example, there are questions that you can think of that can very much give you an indication. So, for example, just ask the person, what is a situation that you've been in which you've done the above and beyond for a customer, right? So, what is kind of the most extreme thing that, again, from previous examples that you might have, that you've done for a customer? And that can give you like an indication. Again, obviously, if you're looking into somebody which is kind of in a sales role, for example. But then if you're looking at an engineer, you can ask, honestly, the same question, but then the expectation would be to for them to actually explain to you who is the internal customer that they're serving, right? And when is it that they've done the above and beyond for that internal customer?
Okay, thank you. We have one more question. Tom is asking, is it possible to change the culture if it has gone off course?
So the answer is yes, and it's not necessarily just being off course. At some point, I can tell you that it might be also just, again, like either circumstances or just like the too much time has passed and the initial mission that you might have set is less relevant at the moment. But I can tell you that it's definitely something that needs to be evolved with the company. But again, you want to do this kind of check-in and review, and you want to make sure, you want to be self-critical enough to ensure that the core values that you have are still being used and are still practical to, again, to kind of driving the company. Again, it's not a one-off kind of thing that you need to do. I know that, again, whether it be startups that I work with or companies that I work in, every time, when there's like a couple of times a year, there's like a management discussions around those values on how they're implemented, how they're being used. Other things that that we see more of, or things that we see less of. If it's one or the other, like how do we kind of compensate for the right thing? Okay, like if we say that on some values we we are kind of not putting enough attention on, is there something that we can do to fix it, or is it something that happened because that specific value is less relevant to the world that we're now living? Okay, so yeah.
Okay, thank you. We do have a few more questions if we have the time. So someone was asking if you could name a large company which is working like a startup.
So again, I think that the examples that they brought, just now, whether it be Airbnb and Zappos, these are relatively large companies. I can tell that one company that obviously Microsoft also we have our own core values and we operate in, but that's kind of the extreme example, let's say. But another great example would be Netflix. They just rolled out a new book, and they have a lot of information about kind of the process that they went through of being a company that kind of competing with Blockbuster to to kind of the large company that they are today, kind of creating an industry almost. And again, I definitely encourage you to check out Netflix as well.
Okay, great. We do have a few more questions. So would there ever be a situation where you would need to evolve the culture? And if so, would introducing new staff who align to the intended culture be a good idea? I just posted both in the chat box as well.
Right. So I do think that it's possible. And again, let's say the easy example that that I might have is with Microsoft. Okay, so Microsoft, obviously, it's a company that's been around for a long time. But then when you kind of think about like the mission that Bill Gates had in the beginning is like to make personal computing accessible and usable with operating system around the globe. Now, fast forward to, I think it was 2014 or 2015, when Satya actually came and became the CEO of Microsoft. One of the things that he actually did is honestly like just take a really hard look at how Microsoft is operating and kind of the core values. And one of the things that came up is that that original mission that we've set in the beginning was less relevant to this modern age where basically computers and technology are accessible almost everywhere, right? And this is what was one of the key things that he did was to evolve the culture and to issue kind of a new mission statement, which is empowering every company and every individual in the world to achieve more. And that is basically kind of the new statement of the Microsoft has today.